everyone, this is Dr. Emily Scherning with American Resiliency, here with an up-to-date 2050 climate forecast for all of our friends in North Carolina. Just so you know where to find my source material, this forecast is based on the National Climate Assessment, which was just updated. We received the 5th National Climate Assessment in November of 2023. There have been some significant changes in the projections in this new edition, so we're updating the outlooks for every state. We use the 5th National Climate Assessment because it represents the highest consensus climate science available. Your tax dollars paid for the development and review of this document. You deserve access to the information. Today, we're breaking down the NCA 5 for North Carolina, and if you want to follow along, here's what you'll do. On the main splash page for the website, go to Chapters and go to All Figures. If you scroll down, you'll see that every figure, every map in the National Climate Assessment is identified by a number. I'm going to tell you the number of everything that I use so that it's easy to get in here, look at the image, and in many cases, they're very high resolution, so you can zoom in, see right what's going on at your house. FYI, American Resiliency is the only nonprofit focused on communicating this important information and making it accessible to normal people. We run on your donations. And so that you know the conditions I model for 2050, we're talking about regularly hitting 2 degrees C as a global temp increase. It seems like that's our most likely climate future. Even if we stay on target for emissions reduction, 2 is the best we're likely to get. We've really blown through our remaining margin to keep business as usual. Our reality is that we're going to be dealing with change. Looking at change at 2C, let's check out figure 1.14, a national overview figure. You can see on this figure that North Carolina is kind of where a couple of different change patterns come together. And depending on where you are in the state, you're talking about a total annual average warming from 3 to closer to 5 degrees F by 2050. And that variation is a meaningful preview of the outcomes we're projecting for North Carolina by 2050 because your state does encompass such a wide range of elevations, landscapes, and ecosystems. We're going to see varying rates of change in different parts of the state. Some of them will become more different more quickly. Others are expecting relatively conserved outlooks. Let's get a clearer look at that change landscape by checking out changes to extremes in the seasons. Here we are looking at figure 2.11. Taking a bird's eye view of this figure for North Carolina is just impossible for me for your state. There's so much going on. So let's focus on heat first and zoom in on a projected increase of days over 95. All right, doing that, you can see that the border with Tennessee has kind of a lot of action going on, high variability. Asheville is looking good to stay cool in the summer. I think that's very important to highlight Asheville because so many people are going there for the resilience potential. And hey, this is a good, strong first sign for that area in these updated projections. We're going to talk more about challenges facing Tennessee another time, but just a glance here, you can see elevation is not always as protective of the summer cool as you might hope. In North Carolina, however, there is good hope available in that department. Once you get out of the mountains, you can see that there's a gradient where it gets warmer faster, and then the rate of change again is going to slow by the coasts. So less dramatic heat up by the coasts, very little heat up in the mountains, and then especially in this Midland area here, a higher degree of warm up than the rest of the state. These orange colors are 15 and then 25 increased days over 95. All right, so you can see at a glance, we're talking about a different map here. I've just switched us over to additional nights over 70, where once again, you can see a big change gradient for North Carolina. This is one of the most serious changes that's likely to occur in the state, is this dramatic increase in nights where it doesn't drop below 70. You're looking at about an additional month of it as soon as you get out of the mountains, where we do see pretty good cool night preservation. That nighttime warming is going to have agricultural impacts, which we'll talk more about in a little bit, and it's going to cause health impacts. People can tolerate a pretty hot day if they can cool down at night, but for much of inland North Carolina, we're talking about a future climate where there's a little under a month more of potentially dangerous temperatures during the day, and natural nighttime cooling won't be available. Let's look at the winter for a minute. Here we're zoomed in on the third part of figure 2.11 with this figure showing our projected loss of freezing days, of days below 32. For almost all of the state, we're talking about losing 2 to 3 weeks of cold weather. You can see that is consistent up there in the mountains. They're having a loss too. That's a change that's going to stress plants in the mountains. But with the cool summer preservation, we can keep our fingers crossed for the health of that forest. It really looks like a limited amount of stress, especially compared to many forest landscapes across America. So we know that the winters are projected to become shorter. Let's find out if they're going to become milder. We're going to do that with information from figure 11.3, which you can see is gigantic. This is why I finally perhaps was smart enough to cut out the information we need. So this is from contemporary information about North Carolina. This is North Carolina by 2050. And this is our key down here, letting you see which plant hardiness zone we're moving into. Alongside that nighttime warming, these changes in winter lows have profound agricultural and landscape implications for your state. That dark orange, it used to only be down by South Carolina by the sea. That's zone 9, that dark orange. It's coming way up into North Carolina. The mild winter you used to have just by the coast, it's coming way inland, way up past the Research Triangle, all the way past Winston-Salem, almost to the base of the mountains. Your foothill regions in particular are going to experience dramatic winter change. The mountains themselves, this is not bad climate preservation considering how far south we are. You're looking at about a half a zone shift here, whereas much of the state, it's a zone and a half. But you do have a climate analog, which is very useful. If you've ever gone near the coast in the winter and felt the climate there, seen the plants there, like by Jacksonville, North Carolina, that's the landscape that'll be wanting to move inland to gain territory. Trying to think like a big picture climate analog, if you want to think about what state today is most like how North Carolina will feel in 2050, your closest bet is probably Georgia today. If you look at the Georgia video for how Georgia is going to change, similarly, they have good preservation up by the mountains. And as you get to the coast, Georgia is going to be taking on a really Florida-like flavor. And that sort of tropical feeling is actually going to come all the way up into South Carolina. If you want to think about what you're going to feel like in 2050, you're going to feel like the Georgia coast, and Georgia coast is going to feel like the Florida coast. So, as we're looking towards landscape transitions to agricultural transitions, it's good to think about Georgia today as a solid analog. That's a big change, but it's a change we can envision. And I want to show you another quick way that you're like Georgia, a state on which I'm really quite bullish for your region. When we talk about transformation, transformation has costs, right? In 22.17 here, you can see that both North Carolina and Georgia have not dissimilar costs to get your grid up to date. And that for both of you, proactive adaptation, getting started now to build capacity for the increased electrical demand that those warmer summers will bring, it's going to save you a lot of money in the long run. This figure interesting too. This is figure 22.15. It's proactive adaptation costs on your rail system. This kind of a nice highlighting of those high change inland areas that are going to be most swamped. And we see this lightning here, a window of like normalcy around Raleigh. And that's not because Raleigh is fine. It's because Raleigh is already getting to work. It's already engaged in proactive adaptation. And many of your cities in North Carolina are aware of these outcomes, these potential for change by 2050, and are starting to get ready and are starting to make the infrastructure changes North Carolina needs to be strong in the future. Let's talk about water. I'm going to take a minute to talk about precipitation, and then we'll look at the coast and get an eye on sea level rise. All right, here in 210, we can see that you're looking at an increase of about 5%, a statistically significant increase. We see it's cross-hatched here. More rain at a 2-degree future. If we look down, if we miss the target, if we end up at 3C, you'd be talking about even more rain, more like 10%, with some interesting windows of stability. Down by the coasts, you see only the 5% increase. And here, another window of normalcy. In a warmer climate, you need more water. Plants need more water. So increased precipitation and the outlook is good. But you're already seeing some crazy, like drenching rains in the area. Let's look at our projections for that. That'll be in figure 212. Figure 212, we have projected changes to precipitation extremes at 2C of global warming. This has 3 models we can look at. And if there's a consistent model across annual maximum daily precipitation, 5-year maximum daily precipitation, and total precipitation on heaviest 1% of days, we should feel like maybe we have reason to be concerned. And if we take this bird's eye view, it does look like over the mountains, we're looking at a very consistent signal. Let's zoom in here. All right, so North Carolina is hidden by the rain. We're gonna be okay. This dark color is up to 40% more rain per storm, 30, 20. So that is a challenge. All of our other indicators up in the mountains were looking really good, but that is the challenge to prepare for in the mountains. Very intense storms, dropping up to 40% more water per deluge. We all know, particularly in an area where elevation is a big factor, that can be serious. But now we know the sort of scale of preparation we need. And those drenching rains and the projections are one of the reasons we see big flood damage projections in North Carolina. Let's look at figure 22.4. Looking at current and projected risks to homes, we do see some real dark spots in terms of increased costs for flooding risks to homes up in the mountains, like we would expect from that precipitation figure. Of course, we also see increased costs by the coasts. Let's go take a look at that. Talking about sea level rise is really important. We can see that by 2050, we're likely to see 1 to 2 feet of sea level rise across the East Coast. I think it's important to note by 2100, you could be looking at 3 to 5 feet of sea level rise around North Carolina. Accordingly, for the 2050 projections, so that you have some leeway so that you can prepare, we're going to model closer to 3 feet of sea level rise for the northern part of the North Carolina coasts. To explore sea level rise, we're looking at NOAA's Sea Level Rise Viewer. This tool is free. It's really good. You can put in your home address. You can look at any city you're particularly interested in. Let's zoom in here and look at North Carolina. So if we're going to be looking at change here, let's do the at a glance change of 2 feet and 3 feet. We can see that's a lot of land loss at 3 feet. That's a big change to the coastline. I think that it's important that we zoom in and look at what exactly is going on, though. So honestly, this always shocks me about North Carolina. So now we're at the mean higher high water mark, bump it up to 3 feet. It looks pretty good. The beach loss is actually not terrible, even at 3 feet. Here, we're zooming in on Kill Devil Hills. Look at that. It's a tiny margin of beach loss. It's really not a lot of water incursion into the built structures on some of those outer banks. When I did the Florida video, the Keys are just wrecked. I would expect the same outcome for the outer banks, but it's not the case. The projections, it's really important to get very local information. I feel like we get a super solid picture of like what's really going on with sea level rise in North Carolina if we look at Mania, where there's a traditional fishing village that got turned into a big tourist destination. So here's today, there's 3 feet. Looks bad for the new construction, right? For like the holiday construction. But if we look at the village itself, at the historic development, very little direct impact, very little direct damage from sea level rise. Getting a closer view here, this is a pattern that we're going to see over and over again in North Carolina, where people who built with like a fear of the sea or respect for the storms of the area, they're above the new danger line. There's still challenges to deal with, but there's a preservation of the built environment. And these things that are like sticking out of the water here, these new developments, these fancy developments, not the same respect, much higher level of direct damage. Let's come back out and let's take a quick look at Wilmington and Jacksonville. So here we are by Wilmington and Carolina Beach. We're modeling 2 feet of sea level rise. And we can see that even down here by the beach, there is some direct damage at 2 feet, right? Some of your vacation homes that are right by the water are not looking so good. But look at the relative beach preservation. You're losing some beach, but there's still plenty left there to save. This is actually one of the more stable beach outlooks that we see this far up on the East Coast. Looking inland a bit, looking in towards where people live, we can see, again, you're very near the water, but the general level of damage around here, it's quite low. You do have land loss. You are going to have a changed landscape. There are risks from saltwater incursion into the groundwater, into the soil, but there's relatively little direct damage to the built environment. This means that you have a tremendous amount of resilience potential, particularly down here in this southern area of the North Carolina coasts. In Jacksonville, again, it's the same story. Everywhere that was kind of marshy is now going to be kind of wet. but people who built on hills, the historic neighborhoods, places that were built when people were like kind of worried the sea was going to eat them, they were right. The sea tries to come and eat you, you're going to be okay. Looking down to New River, looking down by the beach there, we're currently at the mean high water mark, looking up to 2 feet. We can see again extremely limited damage to much of the built environment, even to most of these homes that are like right on the water, looking down at the beach. There is some beach loss, but this looks frankly fantastic. If we consider what's going to happen up by New Jersey, up by New York, really nice beach preservation, really nice resilience potential in North Carolina. Like I said, the challenge to those southern beaches in North Carolina, it's not nothing. There are still challenges and impacts from that sea level rise, even if it has relatively little direct impact on property. You're still worried about salt water getting into the groundwater, getting into the soil. People always want to go to the beach, right? Having a fairly stable, well preserved beach system, I could see the desirability of those areas increasing. I think it's important. A lot of us hear about sea level rise. We think about the places we love just disappearing. And there are some places with that sad outlook. I mentioned the Keys earlier. They look really bad. In North Carolina, though, I think it's very important to see that we're talking about limited damage. Are some new vacation houses in the Outer Banks going to fall into the ocean? Yes, they are. I bet you're going to see it on TikTok. Are you going to lose, though, your historic coastal communities? No, you have a deep potential in North Carolina for resilience and for preservation of your beloved landscapes. But there are other challenges. I want to make a quick note about fire. In North Carolina, you can see here that we have an increased risk, a change in the number of days where we're going to expect fire danger to be fairly high, both in the mountains and near the coast. So for North Carolina and wildfire, it used to be a present but unusual threat. Once a decade, you might get big wildfire conditions. Now we're talking about significant conditions being present for a big wildfire maybe every 5 years. And that's scary. It's important to know that we have learned, though, from the big fires in the West, we've learned a lot of landscape management tools. As we build resilience, we can work on building resilience against fire and hopefully bring that risk down. And let's round this up. In North Carolina, you have an intense range of change taking place across the state. In the mountains, the temperatures are looking relatively stable, but you've got really intense precipitation headed your way. Down in the developed urban corridors, you're going to be facing increased power demands from the warming climate, and you're going to need to think about nighttime warming and the serious impact it'll have on magnifying the urban heat island effect. Both inland and towards the coast, thinking about Georgia today as a climate analog, both for landscape and for crop shifts, could be very useful. And I hope will help you face the changes to come in a brave way, in a way where we can embrace change and get ready. Because this outlook has some real challenges, but I don't think they're challenges that say you got to get out. A little further north or south on the coast, the sea level rise will have crazier housing impacts. Pop over with the sea level rise tool and look at Charleston. The water's coming right up into the downtown. Take a look at Long Island if you want to freak yourself out. There are hundreds and hundreds of homes that will be lost. North Carolina isn't facing no risk from sea level rise. You're honestly in a little bit of a sweet spot where you're taking hits, but the relative damage, the change to your character is not as big as we see elsewhere on the East Coast. Resilience building is going to make a huge impact on North Carolina, both in terms of cost savings and in terms of community outcomes. I don't know that I would push North Carolina as a destination state, although those southern North Carolina coastal communities look as stable as beach communities anywhere in the East. They look really nice. But I do think overall this is an outlook where North Carolina's communities by and large can stay put, where we can become resilient against change. We can stay in our homes. There is hope in this outlook. We can prepare for what's coming. Let's get ready. Folks, thanks for listening. And I'd also like to thank all of the donors and volunteers who contribute to American Resiliency. If you are interested in giving, please check out the donation link on our About page on the YouTube channel or go to our website, www.americanresiliency.org. We are a registered 501c3. If you send us direct donations, they are tax deductible. Thanks to the generosity of this community in both funding and time, we've really been able to step up the quality of our videos for these updated forecasts. Thank you so much, and thanks so much for being here with me. Let's get ready together.